Hello AP Biology students, we're going to go over the 9th section in Unit 4. And in this section, we're going to start our transition from mitosis to meiosis. And this is where we're specifically going to just kind of review the main concept of what meiosis is. I'm not going to focus on any of the minor details of how meiosis happens, but just kind of go over the major concept of what meiosis is. So by the end of this part of the unit, you should be able to identify parts of meiosis and parts of mitosis and tell me the difference and similarities between the two. One concept I'm going to review before I get into the content here is diploid versus haploid. Diploid is the total number of chromosomes, which consist in body cells typically, and haploid is half the number of chromosomes, and they usually consist in sex cells. For humans, we have a diploid number of 46 and a haploid number of 23. During mitosis, you can see our body cells have 46 chromosomes, and that cell is going to split, but each new cell will also have 46 chromosomes. So again, through mitosis, a diploid cell divides and makes two diploid cells. During meiosis, yes, we're still going to start out with a diploid cell of 46 chromosomes. But through 2 rounds of division, you're going to see that number be halved and be only 23 chromosomes at the end. Again, this is important to remember that these cells are going to be haploid cells. They have half the number of chromosomes, which should make sense because during meiosis, we're producing sex cells. So like I said before, meiosis is the cell division where the number of chromosomes is going to be halved in order to produce sex cells, or gametes. At the end, we produce 4 haploid cells through 2 rounds of division. These 2 rounds are called meiosis 1 and meiosis 2. We definitely need to know about the term homologous chromosomes going forward. Homologous chromosomes are chromosomes that have the same length and centromere position. They also have genes in the same location. I like to think of homologous pairs of chromosomes like a pair of shoes. A left shoe goes with the right shoe and they are a pair. In the example above, you can see this chromosome goes with that chromosome because each one was inherited from the mother and father. The red one here being from the mother and the blue one here being from the father. You can see each of our 23 pairs of chromosomes gets one of the chromosomes from each parent. So each number here represents a different homologous pairs of chromosomes. Again, each of these chromosomes, one comes from the mother, one comes from the father, one comes from the mother, one comes from the father. Something that we're going to start focusing on in this part of the unit is something called alleles. These are alternate forms of genes, or what I like to call them, just different flavors of genes. So you can see we have different genes here, and sometimes on these homologous pairs of chromosomes, the genes are going to be different types. Sometimes they're going to be the same type, and sometimes they're going to be different. In either case, these different types of genes are going to be known as alleles. It's going to be really important that we understand on these homologous chromosomes, we have the same genes, but we have different versions of those genes. Here's again another way of looking at it. You can see our homologous chromosomes have genes in similar locations, but their alleles may be different. They may be the same, but they also may be different. Non-homologous chromosomes are different lengths and have different genes. Sister chromatids are going to be attached at the centromere and have the same exact alleles, since they are replicated chromatids. Lastly, when we talk about homologous pairs of chromosomes, we should know about things called autosomal chromosomes and sex chromosomes. Autosomal chromosomes are chromosomes that don't obviously determine the sex of an individual. Humans have 22 pairs of these autosomal chromosomes, but each species might have a different number of autosomal chromosomes. Having higher or larger amounts of chromosomes doesn't mean that you're more evolved or less evolved, it's just how your species has evolved throughout time. For humans, we have 23 pairs of just total chromosomes, 22 of which are autosomal chromosomes. Our last pair is known as the sex chromosomes, and these chromosomes determine the sex of an individual. Typically, not all the time, but females are XX and males are XY. In most cases, that will be the sex chromosome combination, but there are variations of these pairings. So I'm not going to go over those variations. I'm not going to dive into the differences that we may see in inheriting more or less of these chromosomes and their effect. But I like to mention here that XX and XY are the most common, but they're not the only ones. I like to remind my students that we should definitely know about mitosis before moving on to meiosis, because we're going to see a lot of the similarities that we saw in mitosis in meiosis, but there are major differences. So make sure you know mitosis before we get into meiosis.